possible to run against an incumbent, one who's been there for a long time and whose family has a legacy in the area? Is it possible to bring new leadership? And more importantly, perhaps, is Ancaster ready for change? Well, we have here on the Oshow Craig Cassar to answer those very questions and to explain why he decided to run in Ward 12. And if Councillor Ferguson runs again, it will be a mighty battle, I think, by anyone's calculation. So, Craig, welcome to the Oshow.
Thanks, Laura.
So, what made you decide to try to run against a long-standing incumbent councillor, an old guard, if ever there was, like Lloyd Ferguson?
Well, there's many answers to that question, many different layers. And number one would be, he's been there for 16 years and we need change. The world is very different than it was 16 years ago. And we need to think about the future, about climate, about, social justice and what the future is like. And I don't think that the current council, most of them anyway, are really looking to the future. And I just couldn't stomach that and let the same old thing continue. And so my nature is to do something about it. And so I decided to step up and provide that option for leadership. And you question whether it could be successful. I sure hope it's successful. And I've already talked to a lot of people who want it to be successful because they know we need to go in a different direction.
One of the reasons why we decided to have you on the Oshow, we weren't sure if we were going to go into some of the ward races, but just the fact that, if Councillor Ferguson decides that he wants to run again, his family has been an important part of Ancaster society for a very long time. And so you have a life in the private sector, right? So what are you leaving to do this, Craig? And what was it that, other than frustration at the way that council is going, what was it that made you think, no, this is the time, this October 24th, I can have a shot at really a major change in Ancaster?
Well, yeah, I do work in the private sector today. I work at Maple Leaf Foods in supply chain, which has its whole set of challenges in supply chain. If you're following the news last year, I've been there a long time, great company to work for. However, the community is very important to me. So just looking at the direction we're going, and for my kids, I have 3 teenage kids with my wife, and we can't just continue to go this direction. So I can bring leadership, and I have lots of leadership skills. I'm very involved in the community. So just watching things play out over the last year with the sprawl vote, and then with what's going on with particularly in Ancaster here on the Garden Marsh. So some folks will have seen our work with Save Our Streams and the documentary I did about that. I just decided someone needs to step up, and no one else was. And I know there are other progressive candidates around the city who are in the fray now. And I think we can make a real positive difference if there's enough change with people who are looking to the future.
Well, let's talk about something specific that Councillor Ferguson just said just in the last couple of weeks at City Hall. And let's just roll the clip. And this is where he talks about questioning the science and the cost to climate mitigation. Let's have a look.
I like Councillor Jackson's description, saying that, what's the flow to the taxpayers? And so we know that. I heard bold statements like, if we do nothing, it's going to cost far more, but I don't see the science to that. I certainly believe we need to do what we can to reduce the carbon footprint, but I want to know the cost.
If you don't believe that we have a climate change problem, you're in denial. You don't have to look very hard on the internet or magazine articles or newspaper articles to see the science. The science is there. And of course, we're not going to go into the details now, but it's there. And if you say you can't see it, you're trying not to see it. So we can't have leaders at any level of government who don't believe in climate change or don't think it's important or don't think it's necessary to mitigate it and to mitigate not only climate change, but how to adapt to it. So, it's infuriating to hear that from a leader who has been around for so long and you think would be professional enough to be curious about what's changing, what's important to the community, how is the future going to change for the community. And for him to just say that just gets my blood boiling because it's so out of touch with reality.
Well, and to hear him kind of ping pong off of another old guard counselor, my counselor, Tom Jackson, who I think's been in the gig for 3 decades or something.
Yeah.
Where is the curiosity? Where is the belief in science? Where is the concern for future generations? And so I want to play a clip of the last time you were on the Oshow, Craig, because you were part of a panel talking about Lloyd as chair of the Hamilton Conservation Authority. This was before the vote, which I believe he won again. Is that correct?
He did.
And you mentioned just before this clip that, beyond that vote, there's still a serious concern around the wetlands in Ancaster. So when it comes to Lloyd's question about what is the cost about not doing mitigation, I want to show this little clip from you about what is the cost if we keep going in the direction that we're going in.
But here's a fact I'll leave you with is the Ancaster Creek watershed that we're talking about used to be 8% wetlands. 96% of that is gone now. So there's a tiny, tiny fraction of that watershed left, and this marsh, Garner Marsh, is the headwaters of the Ancaster Creek. So just think about that. 96% is already gone. So if that concerns you and you think that's wrong, then that's what Save Our Streams is about. So we want people to understand these facts, get educated.
So, Craig, you wanted to leave us with some facts, with some information. You want people to be educated. Do you think that there's an appetite in Ancaster to be really informed and educated on the facts, to really look at the environmental costs and the costs of environmental degradation and what that means for, such a beautiful community going forward?
Mm-hmm. The more people I talk to, the more I will say yes to that question because people aren't aware or weren't aware previously. I talked about the Follow the Flow of Ancaster Creek documentary I did. That was in April, it was posted. It's been viewed thousands of times. And I've run into so many people who've come up to me or just in other conversations and groups, and they've said, wow, I learned so much. I didn't know about the impact or how much wetland we had already lost. And I just didn't realize it. So people's eyes are opening up. So the community is aware and wants change. So our leadership needs to respond to that. And unfortunately, I don't think the current leadership, in many cases, certainly in Ward 12, is willing, able, to do that. So let's get new leadership in there because people do want it. Not everyone, but more and more people are becoming aware. And if there's a meme you want to call it on the internet that shows it's animals and insects in a circle with humans in the middle. And because humans seem to think that we are the center of everything. And then right beside it, there's one where the human is in the circle with everything else. So, we are part of nature. We don't control nature. And you only have to go as far as looking at the floods that we experience, or the fires that have happened in BC last year that burned down the whole town. Things are happening and we need to react and we need to adapt. So we can't do that with the people who are thinking in 1950s, 1970s mentality.
Yeah, actually, our family drove through those fires during Hoser Trek. It was terrifying. There were helicopters dumping water over the highway. We could see the fire, a couple hundred yards from where we were stuck in traffic. It's terrifying stuff.
Wow.
The sky was yellow. You never forget that. We didn't see we saw a pink sun for days, right?
Right.
We didn't even know if we could get out of BC. So yeah, it gives me goosebumps just remembering Hoser Trek and our kids seeing that. They felt like they saw climate change for real. And you kind of wish that some of these decision makers had, if not direct experience, at least curiosity about these things. But to your point, Craig, just let's suppose that there are citizens who might know more or be more invested or involved in some of these issues. Kind of the idea of a representative in a representative democracy such as we have is to listen to those citizens and represent them. Mm-hmm. And so when Stop the Sprawl, Stop the Urban Boundary Expansion Group had, I think, over 18,000 emails sent into Hamilton City Council on this issue. Wasn't it Councillor Ferguson in Ward 12 who, made the suggestion that the way that those came in was not as consequential as sort of the folks that he's talking to? It felt like negating the voice of so many people from Ancaster.
Yeah, he did. And he also said that emails were coming in, were sent by bots and on more than one occasion on different topics. So, I don't know how you can just dismiss that many people and say that, that is not the opinion and that's not important. So but that's what we need. We need someone who's going to listen and engage. And, I'm hardwired to do that. I enjoy connecting with people and understanding their perspective because I know I don't understand Everything. I've not lived the life that everyone else has lived. I come from privilege, because of the color of my skin, the family I was born into, the education I got, and the job I have today. But not everyone has that. They have different perspectives. And those of us who have privilege, I believe, should be helping pull other people up and understanding their stories and helping their lives be better. It's just not the people who have a beautiful property, with a treed, shady backyard who may not deal with the consequences of a warming world, but about the people who live in different circumstances who can't afford those kind of things. So, yeah.
So let's talk about that, because you're not just a one issue candidate. You're not just doing this because of the environment. I watched your video, and you talk about other issues. You talk about issues around affordability and affordable housing. And you talk about hate, which we'll get to in a moment. But let's just focus on the affordability, because some of the debate in Ancaster has been about how do you densify without, losing some of what makes it a very beautiful place, right? Like, what is it going to mean for downtown? How big are the buildings going to be? What is it going to mean for these single lots? So what is the discussion in Ancaster around densification and housing affordability? And where do you stand?
Well, we absolutely need gentle intensification. And we can do that with also preserving the heritage in Ancaster Village, right? There's a very strong vocal group about preserving the heritage, and they need to be listened to and respected. Right now, there are proposals for 2 very large developments in downtown Ancaster, which my personal opinion is they're not being built to the human scale, what's being proposed, right? I think if you build things that are the human scale, which means not more than just a few stories that have live edges, meaning commercial on the ground floor, living above, you're going to bring people in there into the downtown. You're going to bring more tax revenue because you're stacking a little bit and not having to build new infrastructure, which costs money. You have new businesses in there. People will be happier because they don't have to have a car to drive. And then those dwellings will be more affordable compared to single family homes on however many whatever land size developers are building today. But some people want that. Some people want to live in a single family separated home. Other people can't afford it, don't need it. So let's build things in a city where they can walk and don't need a car necessarily, and they're just going to be happier. So it's about building a happier city as well as something that's going to be able to deal with climate change.
Well, it's interesting. The mayor of Paris just put out her vision for a 15-minute walkable Paris, where any mall you live in, you get 15 minutes away from everything you need, right?
Exactly.
And I think of Ancaster Village as being very much a walkable, beautiful place with all of the stone buildings. It could truly be that kind of community where everything you need is within lovely walking distance.
Yeah.
Bistros, shopping, all the rest of it, right? But use the word city. In Ancaster, I think of as a town, or are you talking about the broader city of Hamilton? Because
yes.
I get the sense you're not just talking about Ward 12 when you talk about these things.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea, we were talking about Ancaster Village. So the ideas are applicable there, but they apply to the city more broadly as well. So that's why I use that term, because we need this throughout the city, right? If you just drive down any main street and you will see a lot of parking, and there's a building, a restaurant or some kind of store in the middle, and there's just parking around it, and it's one little small contained building with nothing. So that space can be so much better. Councilors talk about getting more tax revenue, and I just referenced this. If you put a little more density into there, you don't have to pay for the infrastructure, but you have more tax revenue, so you're ahead of the game. So there's just a much different way of thinking about how we develop our city and build our city, and I don't think many of our current councilors are accessing all the knowledge that's out there. And I've been very busy reading about that, and there's so much out there.
There really is. And for people who travel, I don't know how much they travel, and I'm not trying to sound like a travel snob, but when I was doing the Hamilton sign project a few years back and presented to council, I got the sense a number of them hadn't left the city, or not in a long time, weren't aware of what other cities were up to. And we need people around that council and the chamber, and this is my bias, around that horseshoe, who are curious, who are intellectually curious and willing to challenge their beliefs and the status quo and not try to reinvent everything themselves. There are all kinds of best practices all over the place. Okay, so I want to move to something you said that really struck me in your video, is you ended it with one of my favorite Canadian lyrics of all time, which is, "We've got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight." What did you mean by that, and why did you use something so provocative in your video?
Great question. Well, I think a lot of us feel that Hamilton isn't nearly the city we want it and need it to be. And it feels like darkness. It feels like we're not being listened to. It feels like leaders are not going the direction we want. So, and as an example, you brought up the Stop Sprawl movement. We were kicking at the darkness there, and we saw some daylight. We got some daylight. So we just need to keep doing that. We need people to speak up because their voices can be heard. And that's a great example of what Stop Sprawl did. And we need leaders who are going to do that as well. We are in a place now that we may not be happy with, but we got to keep pushing because we can make change.
Well, you also referenced hate in your video. The Hamilton Anti-Racism Center was finally getting started hiring an executive director. And as they were having the discussion at council about the funding for that and the hiring, Councillor Ferguson put a very bizarre stipulation or suggestion out there that, frankly, well, let's watch the clip.
HCCI, well, they do get some funding, I believe, from the city. Has become a big critic of the city, and I want to make sure that if we're going to fund you, you're not going to go down that same road. I want you to focus on helping those who are subjected to racism and seek the help of the city where we can. But I just want to say, make sure you stay clear to your mandate. You know, the mayor finally had to write an op-ed or an opinion piece in the Herald Spectator about the HCCI and their incorrect criticism of, as what he said. So I'm actually pleased that there is a firewall between the two groups now, and it'll probably and Linda, I assume you've been watching this from the sidelines and make sure we don't fall into that same thing that the other group has. So if there is a firewall between HCCI and this new group, that's fantastic, and I'm fully supportive. I know everybody's seeking funding for a lot of causes.
Yeah, and I think those comments from Councillor Lloyd Ferguson, when you hear them, you realize how problematic they are in the broader scope of the work that needs to be done. When we talk about Hamilton being the hate capital of Canada, it's not a title that anyone wants to walk away with a degree of pride. The important work that is done by Kojo and others in our community is central to that, to being able to combat hate and racism in our community. And so we need to stand in solidarity now, as we have been, and Kojo has been very supportive of me in this role. And so when someone says something like a firewall that needs to be between organizations, we need more solidarity, more compassion, and more comprehensive looking at these issues and building a plan and a strategy to address them. And I think Councillor Ferguson's comments missed the mark and undermined that important work.
So what we just heard there was the response from Lyndon, who was told he had to put up a firewall between him and Kojo Damptey, who, by the way, is running against Terry Whitehead in the election now. So what was your takeaway from that whole incident? And is that part of why you said, as part of your Ward 12, we've got to address hate?
Yes, it's certainly one of the examples. Unfortunately, not the only one, but that response doesn't make any sense to me at all. And that is one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons that I mentioned hate in my video. We need in our community not to work in silos. You can't be effective if you're working in silos. So we need to talk to each other. We need to listen, and we need to collaborate. So yeah, that statement makes no sense whatsoever.
I think we've covered a lot of the themes that I certainly saw in your campaign video, and the video caught my attention because it got a lot of attention. Is there a website people can check out if they'd like to get more information?
Absolutely, there is. It's called craigforward12.ca.
Thank you for being on here as a candidate in this election. And everyone, if you're enjoying this kind of content, please like on YouTube, subscribe, and that we can keep getting it to you. But also, more importantly, vote on October 24th and tell your friends too as well. This is the mission of the Oshow, is all about getting information out there on the important issues in Hamilton, especially in an election year. We all need to vote. It's incredibly important to our democracy and, as we've just heard, to our future. Thanks so much, Craig.
Thanks, Laura.